Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I would be extremely grateful. And I'm saying this before the review because we got a big one on the docket from Adele 30. I can't be the only one who feels like any discourse around Adele is a little bit weird, at least in comparison with the other big A-list acts. Now, a big part of this is because she doesn't really play the whole pop star game in the same way that a lot of chart toppers do. She doesn't seem to have the ravenous stan army online. The albums, they feel like events, but they're not really promoted in the same way they would be from nearly any other record label. Her release strategy seems almost independent of stream trolling hype culture. You know, the sort of old-fashioned tactics that you think wouldn't work in the modern age, but they kind of have. For about a decade now, too. Now, part of this is simply Adele's mass commercial and critical appeal, reinforced with excellent management that'll ensure she'll consistently stack up the Grammys and blockbuster sales, as she's a soul singer with an incredible voice and an old-school sensibility that can feel kinda timeless, even though she's only 2 years older than me. And hell, it's not like the adult contemporary market has gone anywhere, and she definitely fits that niche. But I'll admit, I'm still kinda stunned her formula still works. Now, some will call it quality winning out and point to plenty of classy retro soul singers who have attempted this lane for a lot of similar reasons in that market, but there's no guarantees in this industry, and I've seen singer-songwriters as good, if not better, not achieve that same level of success. And hell, to be perfectly frank, after 6 years in between albums, even knowing Adele's star power and her silent majority fan base, I still had some doubts about 30 as an album. Because again, we know Adele's formula. For better and for worse. I was looking forward to the writing becoming a little bit more interesting with age and time, but Adele also had vocal surgery in 2017, and she seemed to be approaching this new album with a slightly different feel. Now, part of this is me never being all that fond of the oddly conceived pop concessions she includes, which kept 25 from being as great as 21 was. But on the flip side, how much more do we want to hear Adele hit the same formula but with very limited revisions? Especially on a much longer project. And while it's not like anything I'll say here is gonna matter, Adele is gonna see resounding success regardless of any sort of reviews, even though this time they've been overwhelmingly positive. I did have some reservations about how a critical press starved for easy consensus would just flock to this. But for me, look, 25 is really good. Easy on Me is a fantastic hit, but would the rest of the album measure up? Oh god, I wish it was that simple. And that's the sort of thing that makes a review like this difficult, where I had to split it off. Because it's the sort of project where I can respect what Adele is trying to do with this, a complicated exploration of trying to end a bad relationship, doing the difficult work of repair, and then learning how to trust and love again. And by definition, that means you gotta get a little bit more of an emotionally nuanced and complex project on the writing alone, and Adele is the sort of performer who's got the incredible range and expressiveness to sell it all so well, so it's the sort of swing that's set up for the Grand Slam. But to extend the baseball metaphor, she might have hit it out of the park, but a runner or two getting tagged at the plate causes the project to stumble a lot harder, and it leaves me really frustrated that I just do not like this more than I do. And what's utterly exasperating is that most of her team of producers and co-writers, they're the same. So digging into what kinda went off the rails with this is gonna lead to a messier conversation that makes me hope and pray that y'all are willing to be patient with me on this one. Ironically, a lot of these points can be extrapolated with some of the underlying issues that I have with 25, where despite her delivering a more gripping, dramatic scene on 30, the problems may have become all the more pronounced. So strap in, this is gonna go long. And let's start with the pacing. Adele albums usually have moments that can feel clunky or lagging, normally when the grooves or the dramatic stakes lighten a little bit. But in this case, it's a lot more obvious in the track length and the tempo, with multiple songs clocking over 6 minutes, which happen to encompass the final quarter of the album. And while I understand that Adele albums can be very ballad heavy, and that a project like this is pensive and very deliberately paced. There's a difference between that and songs that run short of musical or lyrical ideas and then kill any sense of momentum. But it's got issues with momentum right from the very start. Unlike Rolling in the Deep or Hello, this album doesn't start off with a massive swing. And after Easy on Me, the second song, which stands as one of the few tracks that I have a hope in hell of crossing over, the spare 6-minute My Little Love, peppered with a sound collage snippets and an extremely restrained groove, prevents the project from building up any sense of steam. But either way, this is an album that can feel absolutely bloated, or at the very least where Adele didn't really have to care about the runtime. She mentioned in an interview that I Drink Wine was projected to be around 15 minutes and she was the one who cut it back, but you couldn't have done that with about half of these songs on this album? Now granted, maybe she thought she needed a little bit more space for some of the experimentation she was trying, and I'm putting that in very obvious quotes because it would be a stretch to say that Adele is tapping into that many new sounds here, even new for her. There's a little bit more of a bluesy stomp on Oh My God and Can I Get It, the latter of which leans on acoustic guitar and is later echoed in the murkier tones of Woman Like Me, with a late pianist Errol Garner delivering some striking melodic embellishments to the weirdly abortive All Night Parking. Honestly, that song could have been longer. And overall, the percussion is a little bit more contemporary, but generally muted, underscoring more developed bass lines as we get the traditional piano and strings arrangements. But those are the fine details. What's actively more of an issue are the backing vocals, starting out on Cry Your Heart Out and continuing until the final track, Love Is a Game. They're squawking, frequently and obviously synthetically touched up. They are the worst and most annoying part of this album, and they're just an awful fit opposite Adele. And they're on nearly half the project, on nearly all the upbeat songs where they can't really be just overlooked and it doesn't match anything she's really done before. This was a conscious decision on her part, and it just doesn't work at all. Now, part of this is the obvious comparison to a song like Hold On, where Adele gets more of a gospel choir behind her and it sounds way more effective and complementary to her vocal timbre and style of singing, whereas here, most of the time it sounds like the most obnoxious parts of a dated stage musical. But then I realized where Adele was inspired to do it: the late Amy Winehouse. Now, this should not be a surprise. Adele has cited Amy Winehouse as an influence. They work in the same style of retro soul with pop touches, and Amy Winehouse repeatedly cited her early girl group influences, where even if you don't like them, you got why they were there on her albums to accentuate the ragged theatricality of her presentation. And you know, there's a much longer and much more complicated conversation that I could have surrounding Amy Winehouse. I personally have some messy feelings about her catalog. It's aged in some really odd ways, at least for me, and I've got some more complicated opinions around retro pop as a whole, but Amy Winehouse also used that style to accentuate the darker side of her content, which is where I think there might have been some parallels to what Adele is trying. But despite similarities in delivery and influence, Adele has a very different presence than Amy Winehouse. Amy Winehouse is sardonic and jaded and sarcastic, and there was always a hint of real danger, whereas Adele is more earnest and yearning, and while she could get just as messy or dramatic, very different edge. I mean, if Amy Winehouse was Miranda Lambert, Adele was Carrie Underwood, if that makes any sense. But going back to some of the god-awful backing vocals, they feel like a girl group element imported from the influence, but without the attitude or stylism to make them fit. The production here is just way too tasteful and opulent, with the style clashing along with the voices, and thus it sounds like theater, reinforcing that sense of the artificial. And that's about the worst thing possible when Adele is trying to make a more mature, grounded, and legit complicated album about her divorce. Now, I'll say this. I'll give Adele a lot of credit for trying to tackle this with nuance and real complexity. I've actually reviewed a surprising number of divorce albums, but what I was immediately reminded of was, speak of the devil, Miranda Lambert's The Weight of These Wings from back in 2016. Another awkwardly structured album that had problems with pacing, but nevertheless tried to explore the morally ambiguous reality of it all. And Adele is actually leaning into that complexity. Not only is there her child is involved, but she's also reconciling with the guilt of ending a relationship where she wasn't happy, and she's got to act in self-interest in order to spare some disaster for her down the line. And it's where I can see at least a justification of the advanced length. The album wants to accentuate the wallow in all sorts of messy emotion, in the fear, the loneliness, the guilt, where she's trying to piece together her sense of self for whatever might come next, maybe more love in the future. And she's very conscious of the fact that all of it will be in the public eye because of her fame. And I'll actually give her more credit for her just still maintaining some relatability amidst all of this, where she doesn't fit the single life archetype that you would see in LA. Or with I Drink Wine, she kind of hits the exact sort of basic wine mom escapism balanced out with the fact of, okay, I kind of need to get over myself. But there is a power dynamic at play within the separation, given songs like Woman Like Me seem to imply that her far less famous ex, who was complacent and lazy, but also a little distant and insecure, that put me in mind of Casey Musgraves' divorce album from this year, Star-Crossed, as there is a parallel dynamic that Adele seems to handle with, I gotta be honest, a lot less grace. Now granted, I don't think all of that is Adele's fault. Rustin Kelly being such an open, expressive artist in the public eye in his own right gave Star-Crossed its own sense of balance, even from a distance, but by the end of this, you get the lingering feeling that there's being more lip service being paid to the complications rather than fully exploring or realizing them, ending with these huge, sweeping power ballads about how Adele tried, and even despite the game of love being for fools, she would do it all again, and I got to admire that. But then you realize that if it feels like theater, and it's trying to go for the broad, universal Hollywood endings, as Adele herself cites as influences, something might have been dropped here, and I don't think that matches the emotional dynamic of Adele's best songs, which have some of that level of emotional complexity that feels more human. Songs like Something Like You, When We Were Young, even Easy on Me, they have a level of conflicting emotionality that 30 was set up to pay off, but midway through the project it becomes a lot more about straightforward affirmation of her journey, where all the lingering consequences set up kind of get dropped. And when an album runs this long, it's just baffling the extra detail doesn't come through when Adele has proven that she's a nuanced enough writer to include it, especially alongside all the voice notes that include snapshots of mixed emotions that feel underexplored. Honestly, there could have been more of them. Ironically, it ends with the same problem that I had with Star-Crossed. More on a lot of feel-good platitudes that probably have a lot of emotional value to those who can relate, but they can't really pay off the morally ambiguous complexity that was set up. And you know what? Maybe that's enough for Adele's global audience who aren't looking for the more specific, tangled, complicated elements that could compromise her relatability and shade the unambiguous happy ending. But to me, it's just not as resonant as when Carly Pearce confronted the end of her marriage this year on 29 Written in Stone, and all the life plans that she had where she wanted to be, they crumbled, and she had to be slow and very cautious to reconstruct things. Or where Lydia Lovelace spent 2 entire projects having a crisis of faith and confidence, where she ripped up every stone in her life and mind to examine why she did it. Or hell, go back to Miranda Lambert, where she had to reckon with religious guilt, a terror of growing older, and where in fact she was the one who cheated on The Weight of These Wings to begin with. There's a lot to unpack there. Or, you know, let's flip the script entirely. For as much as Adele adores Lemonade by Beyonce, that project ripped not just into the tabloid drama, but also Beyonce's history and the messy conflicts of intimacy where somehow with Jay-Z, she chose to stay and try to make it work. And you can call the comparisons kind of unfair if you'd like. I mean, no divorce is the same, Adele's a force unto herself, and the confidence she has lends her the courage to swing in the most conflicted moments, I'll give her that. But from what was set up, it can't help but feel thinner and more basic than it should. A self-justifying rationale where she seems like she's trying to convince herself as much as anyone else, rather than find a deeper reconciliation that could mean more. And you know, that's fine. I'm serious about that. More than ever, the album feels like something that Adele made for herself, rather than something that is more focus-tested. Even if you might point at the dated touches of pop folk whistling on Can I Get It, a song I actually mostly like, but from the runtime, to the bad pacing, to the mishmash of influences, all the theatricality, to how on the final 3 songs, Adele is effectively writing her own self-esteem anthems, I get the impression that Adele needed this for her, with the byproduct of having a massive audience that that'll accept it regardless of the lack of hooks, grooves, momentum, and depth. And that reality means that my subjective review of not really caring as much as I want for this doesn't really matter to Adele or the silent majority audience that'll ensure that nearly every song here will get a spot on the charts. Frankly, I'm frustrated because I couldn't get more out of it, and because I do know Adele can showcase a little bit more nuance, and I'm disappointed this album doesn't live up to the potential that it sets up. But if this is what she needs, I'll judge it on that merit, and as such, it's got its moments. Adele is still a great enough performer, keeps it in quality, again a fantastic singer. Easy on Me is the obvious standout and single. I'll stick up for Woman Like Me, Hold On, even Can I Get It? And there are points where I really hear the promise, but it feels decent at best for me. Strong 6 out of 10. I do envy those who like it more, and it's definitely worth a listen, especially if you need those big affirming moments. Maybe with all the critical acclaim, I was just expecting a little bit more. That's all. It's not bad, but I wanted it to be better. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe again, I would be extremely grateful. I know this review is going to be conflicted. I remember the last time I reviewed Adele 6 years ago. Please just keep things civil in the comments. Again, I really wanted to like this album. I think there was a lot of potential to really like this album. I get where a lot of the reviews are coming from. I just do not hear that same level of depth, and those backing vocals are god-awful. But beyond that, hey, if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process for the last week that I've got it going, or potentially just chat with me on Discord, help support the channel, link to my Patreon's right over there. Don't feel obligated, tough times, I get it, I'll be alright. But if you want to, options available. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.